Out of Washington, some serious allegations this morning facing the State Department.
That's right. According to internal State Department memos, the agency might have called off or intervened in investigation into possibly illegal and inappropriate behavior within its ranks, allegedly to protect jobs and avoid scandals. This concerns the time that Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State. We want to get right to NBC's Chief White House correspondent Chuck Todd with the latest. Chuck, good morning to you.
Good morning, Savannah. You know, there's an old saying in Washington that the cover-up is worse than the crime. But in this case, both parts of it are disturbing. Allegations of prostitution and pedophilia, and allegations that those crimes were somehow covered up or not looked into. So the State Department this morning is having to respond to those claims and those investigations of misconduct by State Department officials, including by an ambassador and security agents attached to then Secretary of State Hillary Clinton. And the allegations are that these investigations were whitewashed, quashed altogether, and that those orders came from high up.
NBC News has obtained documents related to ongoing investigations into some disturbing allegations involving State Department personnel and at least one ambassador. A State Department memo says the ambassador, quote, routinely ditched his protective security detail in order to solicit sexual favors from both prostitutes and minor children. The memo also says a top State Department official directed department investigators to, quote, cease the investigation into the ambassador's conduct. It's just one of what another document describes as, quote, several examples of undue influence from top state officials. On Monday, a State Department spokesperson not confirm specific investigations.
I'm not going to talk about specific cases, but I can say broadly that the notion that we would not vigorously pursue criminal misconduct in any case is preposterous.
A former investigator for the department's inspector general has complained to Congress and the media that the investigations have not been thorough because of the pressure from those high-level officials.
We take every allegation of misconduct seriously, and we look into it.
It was less than 6 months ago that another major internal investigation painted Hillary Clinton's State Department in a negative light. That scathing report on the failed diplomatic security procedures in the aftermath of the Benghazi attack.
What difference at this point does it make? It is our job to figure out what happened and do everything we can.
As we noted, the whistleblower in this case, a member of the Inspector General investigative team at the State Department, she's gone to Congress demanding an investigation, and it's our understanding Congressman Ed Royce, the leading Republican in House Foreign Relations, says he does plan on having an investigation, and no doubt hearings are probably going to come soon as well, Savannah.
But Chuck, where are we on this? Is at this point just allegations from one whistleblower? Have they been substantiated in any way?
Well, here's what it is. The whistleblower says that this report, that the internal investigation having to do with how diplomatic security even investigated these allegations, that's where this scathing report came from. It's how the investigators somehow dropped the investigations, including into this ambassador and onto some other including on folks that were part of security detail. So the allegations themselves haven't been fully substantiated by us, but this Inspector General whistleblower believes that the evidence was clear, but the problem was the investigation wasn't done in time to find out for sure if this misconduct was happening.
More to come on this for sure. Chuck Todd, thank you.
A Fox News alert as the manhunt continues for the van driver in that horrific terror attack 2 days ago in Spain. New details now revealing an even deadlier plot by the terror cell.
Spanish police saying the bombs that caused the house explosion in the nearby town of Alcanar were actually the terrorists' failed plan A for the attack in Barcelona. So, how deep does this terror cell's influence run in that region?
Joining us with his reaction is Mobin Sheikh. He was once radicalized when he was a teenager. He's a former jihadist and a terror expert, and now is helping us all try to make sense every time these horrific attacks happen. Mobin, thank you for being with us.
Thank you very much for having me.
So how should we be thinking about this as we wake up this morning?
Well, there are a number of ways to look at it. I mean, one of them is that this is something that we are supposed to be expecting, or at least I have been expecting by ISIS in Europe. I've been saying this, ISIS is preferring, would rather have these small man teams to commit coordinated attacks simultaneously. And this is exactly what we saw in Barcelona, starting with this house explosion that happened on Wednesday night. and then the 2 attacks that happened on Thursday.
Right. It wasn't that small an operation, though. They had, it sounds like, a dozen people in all, but you're absolutely right. It all started with the explosion of the house about 70 miles away from Barcelona. Moving, that's the house where they were assembling bombs. They were going to put it in one of the 2 vans, then drive it somewhere and try to kill as many people as they possibly could. But when their bombs blew up, and maybe their suicide vests, we don't know exactly what they had, they went out with fake suicide vests and tried to mow down as many people as they possibly could. They had to institute Plan B.
Yeah, you know, so I was saying as well yesterday, I mean, especially when all this information was coming out, that it's like the iceberg model, right? You see the tip of the iceberg sticking out of the water, and underneath the water is a much larger piece of ice. This is like the network that we're looking at. I mean, initially we only had a handful of individuals who were involved. Now I think it's up to 8, if not 12, as you said. And that's just what is visible above the water.
Right.
And there's a much larger network that's at play, at work, underneath the water.
Right.
And that's what I'm looking to see Spanish police move on in the coming days.
But I want to get you to the mentality of the individuals that are doing this. Geraldo, I thought, brought up a really good point. He said, and I agree with this, as a young man myself, when I was in this 18 to 22, 23-year-old range, I was focused on 2 things, quite frankly, and a lot of American males can say the same. I was focused on girls, and I was focused on sports. These individuals are focused on terror, much deeper thinking that is rooted in hatred and misunderstanding. How does this happen? How do you get to that mental state? And what can we do to prevent this? What can we as Americans do, American military, American counterintelligence, do to counteract this?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, you know, it's almost like a running joke where, you know, a lot of these guys just need girlfriends. I'm not trying to minimize it or lessen it, but look, the reality is that it's because of nature and nurture, right? I mean, largely because of how you're raised. You know, hate is something taught, is something learned, and it can be unlearned. But in the case of young teenagers who are growing up in this kind of environment, you know, usually for the Moroccan backgrounds, wherever they may be claiming that there's a marginalization, so there's a grievance factor. They might be talking about wars that are happening in the Middle East, and that might be aggravating factors for them to kind of want to do something about it. And you see this across the board, whether it's, you know, white supremacists or jihadists, hyper-masculinity, you know, this idea that this is what makes you a real man, you know, to be violent, to kill in the name of God on top of that. It's very difficult. I mean, these are social processes, you know, human psychological processes. And it's going to require, you know, psychosocial efforts by community, you know, NGOs.
Sure.
But also the hard end of enforcement. I mean, putting human intelligence, spies in the networks, catching them, prosecuting them, or killing them if we have to.
Well, Mobin, you've been through this yourself, so it's a great perspective to have on this morning. Thank you for being with us.
Investigator Peter Strzok has quit. Special counsel Robert Mueller's probe into alleged Russian interference in the 2016 presidential election. ABC News reports that one of the FBI top investigators, tapped by special counsel Robert Mueller just weeks ago to help lead the probe of Russian meddling in last year's presidential election, has left Mueller's team. The recent departure of FBI veteran Peter Strzok is the first known hitch in a secretive probe that, by all public accounts, is charging full steam ahead. Just last week, news surfaced that Mueller's team had executed a search warrant at the Virginia home of Donald Trump's former campaign manager, Paul Manafort. And the week before that, ABC News confirmed Mueller is now using a federal grand jury in Washington, D.C., to collect documents and other evidence. It's unclear why Strzok stepped away from Mueller's team of nearly 24 lawyers, investigators and administrative staff. Strzok, who has spent much of his law enforcement career working counterintelligence cases, and has been unanimously praised by government officials who spoke with ABC News, is now working for the FBI's Human Resources Division. He is no stranger to complex and controversial investigations. As chief of the FBI's counter-espionage section last year, he helped oversee the FBI's investigation into Hillary Clinton's use of a private email server, and he took part in the FBI interview of the Democratic presidential candidate. Robert Mueller's investigation into Russian interference in the 2016 presidential election is reportedly entering a new phase, with the special counsel now looking to interview White House officials. New York Times reports that, in a sign that the investigation into Russian interference in the 2016 presidential election will remain a continuing distraction for the White House, the special counsel Robert S. Mueller is in talks with the West Wing about interviewing current and former senior administration officials, including the recently ousted White House Chief of Staff Reince Priebus. According to 3 people briefed on the discussions, Mr. Mueller has asked the White House about specific meetings, who attended them, and whether there are any notes, transcripts, or documents about them, 2 of the people said. Among the matters Mr. Mueller wants to ask the officials about is President Trump's decision in May to fire the FBI director, James B. Comey. That line of questioning will be important, as Mr. Mueller continues to investigate whether Mr. Trump obstructed justice in the dismissal of Mr. Comey. No interviews have been scheduled, but in recent weeks Mr. Mueller's investigation has appeared to intensify. Late last month he took the aggressive step of executing a search warrant at the home of Paul J. Manafort, Mr. Trump's former campaign chairman. Legal experts say Mr. Mueller may be trying to put pressure on Mr. Manafort to cooperate with the investigation.